Hi there. I'm Warren Moore, and it's time for another installment of Social Distancing Story Time. This is another adventure of my cowboy character, known as Graham, and this originally ran in an issue of Dark Corners magazine a few years ago. This story is called Burnt Wood. Graham heard the town before he saw it. The desert had purpled with sunset not long before, but between dusk and the waning moon there was still enough light to see a ways, and even later the big chestnut could pick his own way through the empty land. Graham would let it happen. He felt like the horse's passenger, not its rider, but he didn't really have much of a direction either, other than west. The San Juans were behind him, and the plateau ahead. He'd been riding for some time. It seemed like forever some nights. He rode mostly by night in this hot country, making camp in the shade where he could find it. Travel was slower, but cooler, and when you don't care where you're going, speed doesn't matter much. He figured he'd know where he was meant to be when he got there, so he thought he'd let the horse choose. But then Graham heard the music. The thin, clinking notes of a piano came from upwind and over the horizon. He nudged the horse ahead, and after a minute or two, he saw, well, not a town, but the makings of one. Some buildings, wooden frames, tall facades before one-story boxes, and one that had two stories where the music came from. How many people? 30, maybe 40? Was the town growing or dying or somewhere along the way? Graham didn't know, and he didn't think too much of it, but he had been alone for a long while and could use the sound of voices not his own. He rode on toward the town's axis, what passed for a street. At the edge of the town, he saw a sign lettered with running iron on board, Burnt Wood, Colorado. Moving down the street, he saw a dry goods store, a smithy, what might be a stage office, all dark. There were hitching rails, but they were empty, dividing the dust of the street from the dust in front of the buildings. But there had to be water, no town, and midway along the street was the two-story building. Its sign was painted, Bon Temps, Saloon Rooms Baths. Here, Graham saw lights and the silhouettes of figures through the scraped hides on the windows. Here, Graham heard music and voices. He checked his stake, weighing the cost of the night against the cost of another night alone. After a moment, he hitched the chestnut to a rail and walked inside. A few heads turned as he stepped through the doors, but most of the crowd was gathered around the piano, singing an old song, a song from before the war. I Have Got the Blues Today, a song about too much drink, and the next morning. It was a lively tune, and the patrons sang like they had been auditioning for the part of the drunkards in question. He couldn't help smiling as he eased over to the bar. The bartender asked, "What do you have?" "Whiskey," said Graham. "You serve food?" The keeper smiled. "More or less. We got beef and mutton, beans, and maybe a potato. That's a dime. Just beans would be a half dime, and a half dime for the drink." Graham found a silver quarter, dropped it onto the bar so the bartender could hear it ring, and said, "Can this get me dinner with mutton and a room?" The bartender said, "Mister, around here, that'll get you dinner in half the town, or at least the room, dinner, and some bacon and beans tomorrow. We don't get the traffic we had hoped for. Don't know why. There was talk the stagecoach might stop here, but that ain't what happened. It all just passed us by. Maybe the Paiutes scared them off. They run off enough folks around here. Hard to say." He walked back to where Graham figured the kitchen must be, and when he came back, Graham had another half dime on the bar top. The bartender looked at him and said, "You strike it rich or something?" "Not hardly, just glad to see something besides the back of my horse's head." "Well, if you want a game, there's one in the room back behind the piano." Graham shook his head. "No, sir, just some food I didn't cook, and a bed that ain't the ground or a bunk." "We can do that," the bartender said, and went back to polishing glasses. A couple of minutes later, he came back with a tin plate of food. It was the best meal Graham had had since the last one, but there was music and laughter, even the laughter of women, by God, and that was the sauce he liked the best. After he had eaten, he turned again on his bar stool toward the people around the piano. Now they were singing Nellie Bly, and a couple of the crowd seemed to be trying to harmonize. Graham found himself humming along and joined in on the chorus. "Hey Nellie, ho Nellie, listen love to me. I'll sing to you and play for you a dulcet melody." Maybe he didn't have the best voice in the world, but the chestnut gelding had never complained, and neither did the people around the piano. They seemed a bit old-fashioned, but nice enough. A young woman even smiled at him, but Graham figured her interest might be more professional than aesthetic. He had spent enough money that evening and wanted to hold on to the rest in case there was land he wanted to buy somewhere down the trails, or somewhere that the trails hadn't run yet, so he smiled back at the girl and avoided the game in the room behind the piano and turned back toward the bartender, who directed him up the stairs to his room with a pitcher of water for the basin. The room was simple enough: a bed, a chest, and a stand with the basin and a spot for the pitcher. There was a window, again with panes of hide. He latched the door. Everyone had seemed friendly, but no sense of tempting fate. He undressed, boots first. God, it felt good to wiggle his toes. Washed in the basin, and when he felt he had rinsed half the dust in Colorado from his face, he dressed again and stretched out atop the bed, falling asleep before he could even turn the covers down. He woke up as the Paiute was trying to kill him. Maybe the chestnut had stirred, or maybe the Indian had stepped on something, but Graham's eyes snapped open, and he saw the Indian with his spear pulled back, ready to strike. With instinct honed by years in unforgiving territory, he rolled to his left, trapping the spearhead between his right arm and ribs, wrenching it from the Paiute's grasp. Graham launched a heel kick toward the Indian's ankle, catching him just above it. He thought he heard the spear shaft crack, but then he heard the scream and he knew it was his opponent's shin. The Indian crumpled, and Graham scrambled to his feet, finding his gun in the dirt. Graham blinked. The dirt? He looked around. There was no bed, no basin, no chest, no floor. He stood in the midst of charred timbers for yards around, a few still standing, like the skeletons of buffalo he had once seen at the base of a cliff. The chestnut stood ground-hitched. Perhaps he had drawn the Paiute, but there was nothing left that resembled a rail, and the wind competed with the heavy breaths of Graham and the Indian for the only noise around. The remnants of a piano, scorched and hacked, were about 20 feet away. Graham looked down at the Indian, his gun trained on the fallen man's chest. "English?" The Indian grunted. Graham said, "Why?" The Paiute said, "White men were here once. They had horses and blankets, whiskey, rifles. We killed them and took their things, burned their village. Then this was medicine ground. We stayed away for many winters, but I rode here to see if I could find the medicine. Instead, I found you. I thought I would kill you and take your horse." The Indian smiled. "Bad medicine." "Yep," said Graham. "Reckon it was." He looked around the rubble that was once a town until he found a board he thought might hold. He took some strips of cloth from a saddlebag and placed them on the ground near the Paiute, alongside the board. "Tie the board to your leg. You might be able to get home to your people." The Indian looked puzzled. "Why do you not kill me?" "I have more riding to do. Tell your people to stay away from me. I've slept with ghosts, and I am bad medicine. Tell them that." He gathered his few supplies, mounted the big horse, and turned away. "Guess I'd best not count on those beans and bacon," Graham said to the gelding. But if the horse understood, he didn't say. Graham rode away, leaving the town of burnt wood behind him. Well, I hope you liked that one. And if you're enjoying these, feel free to give me a like or subscribe, or you can even follow me on Twitter as @ProfMondo, PROFMONDO. Once again, I'm Warren Moore, and this has been an episode of Social Distancing Storytime. Thanks.